Thinking before acting appears controlled, deliberate, even intelligent. But in the context of discipline, it becomes a silent delay mechanism. The moment between intention and action is where most people lose execution. They pause, evaluate, adjust, and in that gap, friction enters. The body cools. The edge disappears. Discipline does not operate through extended consideration. It operates through conditioned response. When thinking becomes the first step, action becomes optional. And once action is optional, identity weakens. A disciplined individual does not negotiate with the moment. There is no internal discussion about readiness, comfort, or timing. The signal appears, and the body moves. This removes variability. It removes hesitation. Over time, thinking before acting trains the system to wait instead of execute. That waiting compounds. It reshapes behavior. And eventually, what once required no effort begins to feel heavy, delayed, and uncertain. The damage begins subtly. A simple task appears: stand up, start, move, and instead of immediate execution, a layer of thought inserts itself. Should I start now? Is this the best way? Maybe I should prepare first. None of these thoughts feel like resistance. They feel reasonable. But discipline does not erode through obvious refusal. It erodes through acceptable delay. This delay is not passive. It actively trains hesitation into the system. Each time action is postponed for consideration, the brain records a new pattern. Signal does not require immediate execution. Over time, this pattern becomes default. The body no longer responds to intention with movement. It responds with analysis. Analysis introduces weight. Action that was once direct becomes conditional. The individual begins to depend on clarity, on the right mood, on sufficient certainty before moving. But discipline was never built on certainty. It was built on repetition under imperfect conditions. When thinking becomes the gateway, conditions must be satisfied. And conditions are unstable. Energy fluctuates. Motivation shifts. External factors interfere. So execution becomes inconsistent. Not because the person lacks ability, but because they have installed a filter between decision and action. This filter is where discipline collapses. In high-discipline systems, the gap between decision and execution is nearly invisible. There is no time for negotiation. The body has been trained to obey the signal without resistance. This is not instinct, it is conditioning. It is the removal of unnecessary internal dialogue. Thinking feels like control, but in this context, it creates vulnerability. The more time spent evaluating action, the more opportunities arise for avoidance to disguise itself as logic. The mind becomes skilled at generating acceptable reasons to delay. And because those reasons sound intelligent, they are rarely challenged. I'll start when I'm more prepared. I need a better plan. I should wait for the right moment. Each statement protects an action while appearing responsible. But discipline does not require optimal conditions. It requires immediacy. The moment a task is identified, execution must follow before thought expands. This is how friction is bypassed. Not eliminated, bypassed. Once friction is given time, it grows. The body becomes heavier. The task appears larger. The starting point moves further away. What could have been done in seconds now requires effort to even begin. This is where most systems fail, not in capability, but in initiation. Thinking before acting disrupts initiation. It replaces movement with mental simulation. And simulation does not build discipline. Only repetition of action does. A disciplined individual reduces the role of thought in the early phase of execution. Thinking is reserved for correction, not permission. The sequence is reversed from what most people practice. Instead of thinking, then acting, they act, then adjust. This preserves momentum. Momentum is not created through planning. It is created through uninterrupted execution cycles. The shorter the delay between cycles, the stronger the system becomes. Thinking inserts gaps into these cycles. And gaps break momentum. Once momentum is broken repeatedly, restarting becomes harder. The system loses continuity. Each action feels isolated, requiring fresh effort instead of flowing from previous movement. Over time, this creates inconsistency. And inconsistency erodes identity. A person who acts immediately begins to see themselves as someone who executes without hesitation. A person who thinks before acting begins to see themselves as someone who tries, who prepares, who intends. The identity shifts from executor to evaluator. And identity determines behavior more than intention ever will. The critical shift is not removing thought entirely. It is repositioning it. Thought must not stand at the entrance of action. It must follow behind it. Action leads. Thought refines. When this order is reversed, discipline becomes fragile. When it is correct, discipline becomes automatic. What follows is the deeper fracture point, when hesitation is no longer a momentary delay, but a structural behavior. Once thinking consistently precedes action, the body begins to detach from commands. You tell yourself to move, but nothing happens immediately. There is a lag. That lag becomes familiar. Eventually, it becomes expected. This is where authority over self starts to degrade. Discipline depends on a clear hierarchy, decision at the top, execution immediately below. No interference. No reinterpretation. But when thinking inserts itself, it challenges that hierarchy. It questions the command. It evaluates it. And in doing so, it lowers its priority. The body learns that commands are suggestions. At first, this seems harmless. You still act, just slightly later. But the system is already shifting. Because once execution is no longer immediate, it becomes negotiable. And negotiation introduces alternatives, delay, modification, avoidance. Now the individual is no longer operating on command response. They are operating on preference. Preference is unstable. It is influenced by comfort, mood, environment, and internal resistance. So execution begins to fluctuate. Some actions happen. Others don't. Not based on importance, but on how they feel in the moment they are considered. This destroys consistency at its root. And consistency is the only mechanism that turns behavior into identity. Without consistency, there is no reinforcement loop. No accumulation. Each action stands alone, disconnected from the last. There is no chain, only fragments. Thinking before acting causes these breaks. Every pause is a potential interruption. Every interruption weakens continuity. Over time, the system becomes unreliable. You cannot predict your own execution anymore. You intend to act, but intention has lost its authority. This creates internal distrust. You begin to recognize that deciding is not enough. That you may or may not follow through. And once that recognition sets in, discipline drops further, not because of external obstacles, but because the internal command structure has collapsed. Now, even simple actions require effort. Not because they are difficult, but because they must pass through layers of thought first. Layers that did not exist before. Layers that question, delay, and reshape the original command. The individual starts compensating. They try to think better, plan more, refine the approach. But this only deepens the problem. Because the issue was never lack of clarity. It was the presence of delay. More thinking does not fix delayed execution. It reinforces it. At this stage, discipline cannot be rebuilt through motivation or strategy. It must be rebuilt through removal. Specifically, the removal of the gap between decision and action. This requires a shift back to immediate response. The moment a task appears, movement must follow before thought expands. Not perfectly. Not optimally. but immediately. This reestablishes authority. It restores the hierarchy. Decision action. No interpretation in between. At first, this feels abrupt, even uncomfortable, because the system has been trained to expect time for consideration. Removing that time creates pressure, but that pressure is necessary. It forces the body to relearn responsiveness. With repetition, the lag shortens. Commands begin to translate into movement again. The delay shrinks. The negotiation fades. And slowly, consistency returns. Not through better thinking, but through reduced thinking at the point of action. Once consistency stabilizes, identity begins to rebuild. You no longer see yourself as someone who prepares to act. You become someone who acts. Immediately. Without internal resistance. And from that point, discipline is no longer something you maintain. It is something you operate as. The final stage of degradation is subtle, but irreversible if left uncorrected. It is not when you stop acting entirely. It is when action becomes dependent on mental approval. At this point, every command must pass through a checkpoint, evaluation. Is this worth doing right now? Can this wait? Do I feel ready? These questions appear harmless. But they are not neutral. They introduce a requirement that did not exist before: permission. Discipline does not ask for permission. It executes based on structure, not feeling. The moment permission is required, authority has already shifted away from the system and into the moment. And the moment is unstable. This creates a fragmented operating pattern. In some moments, you act. In others, you don't. Not because the task changed, but because the internal evaluation changed. This inconsistency compounds quietly. You begin to rely on favorable conditions to function. When energy is high, execution feels natural. When resistance appears, execution stalls. This creates a false belief that discipline is tied to state. That you need the right mindset, the right clarity, the right internal alignment before moving. But discipline was never dependent on internal alignment. It was designed to override it. Thinking before acting reverses that relationship. Now, instead of action overriding state, state overrides action. This is the collapse point. Because once state becomes the gatekeeper, discipline loses its independence. It becomes reactive. It bends to how you feel, how you interpret, how you evaluate each moment. And since internal states are inconsistent, execution becomes inconsistent. Over time, this leads to avoidance patterns that are difficult to detect. You still appear engaged. You still think about the task. You still intend to act. But the action itself is continuously postponed under justified reasoning. This is not laziness. It is misalignment in execution order. The system is no longer built to move first. And when movement is delayed repeatedly, the starting threshold increases. Tasks begin to feel heavier, not because they are objectively harder, but because they require overcoming accumulated hesitation. This hesitation is stored. It compounds. Each delayed action adds weight to the next. Eventually, even initiating becomes effortful. At this stage, most individuals attempt to fix the problem by improving their thinking. They look for better frameworks, clearer plans, stronger reasons. But this approach fails consistently. Because the breakdown was not caused by poor thinking. It was caused by thinking at the wrong time. No level of improved analysis can compensate for delayed execution. In fact, it amplifies the delay. More thought creates more checkpoints. More checkpoints create more opportunities to stop. The correction is not intellectual. It is behavioral. The system must return to immediate execution as the default response. Not after clarity. Not after readiness. But at the moment of recognition. You see the task. You move. That is the entire correction. There is no optimization in the beginning, no refinement, no evaluation, only action. Once action begins, thinking can re-enter. It can adjust, refine, correct trajectory. But it follows movement, it does not precede it. This restores flow. Flow is not a mental state. It is the byproduct of uninterrupted execution. It emerges when actions connect without delay. When each movement leads directly into the next. Thinking breaks that chain. Immediate action restores it. With enough repetition, the system stabilizes again. The delay disappears. Commands regain authority. Execution becomes predictable. And predictability rebuilds trust. You begin to trust that when you decide, you will act. Without resistance. Without delay. Without negotiation. This is where discipline becomes stable again. Not because you think better, but because you removed thinking from the place it was never meant to be. The correction, once understood, is simple in structure but difficult in execution because it removes a layer most people rely on for comfort. You are no longer allowed to prepare yourself before acting. Preparation, in this context, has been misused. It has become a buffer between you and discomfort. A way to delay exposure to effort, uncertainty, or resistance. But discipline is not built in that buffer. It is built in direct contact with the task. So the system must be stripped back to its raw form. A signal appears. The body responds. No expansion. No internal commentary. No adjustment period. This is not about speed. It is about sequence. If you move slowly but immediately, the system remains intact. If you move quickly but after hesitation, the system degrades. Because the damage is not in how fast you act, it is in whether you allowed a gap to form. That gap is where identity weakens. Every time you hesitate, you reinforce a version of yourself that requires convincing. A version that does not obey its own commands without question. Over time, this becomes your baseline. And once it becomes baseline, reversing it requires deliberate reconstruction. The first phase of reconstruction is mechanical. You do not try to feel ready. You do not try to eliminate resistance. You act in the presence of both. The task appears, you move. Even if the movement is incomplete. Even if it is imperfect. The objective is not quality. The objective is restoring immediacy. This retrains the body to associate decision with execution again. At first, there will be friction. Strong friction. Because the system is used to inserting thought. Removing that process creates tension. The mind will attempt to reintroduce evaluation. Wait. Think first. Do it properly. These impulses must be ignored, not resolved. Because engaging with them is the same as obeying them. Instead, action must cut through them. This is where discipline shifts from concept to identity. You are no longer someone who decides and then considers. You are someone who decides and then moves. Nothing in between. As this pattern repeats, something stabilizes. The intensity of resistance does not immediately disappear, but its influence weakens. Because it no longer controls timing. It can exist, but it cannot delay. This is a critical distinction. Discipline is not the absence of resistance. It is the removal of its authority over action. Thinking before acting gives resistance a voice. Immediate action silences it, not by eliminating it, but by making it irrelevant. Over time, the system becomes faster, not in speed of movement, but in speed of initiation. The gap closes. Eventually, it disappears. And when it disappears, execution becomes automatic. You no longer experience the start as a decision point. It becomes a reflex. A conditioned response to the presence of a task. This is the state where discipline is no longer effortful. Not because the tasks are easier, but because the process of starting has been removed from conscious control. There is no longer a moment where you ask, "Will I act?" You already are. From here, thinking regains its proper function. It is no longer a gatekeeper. It becomes a tool for refinement during action. You adjust while moving. You correct while executing. But you never stop to decide if you should begin. This preserves continuity. And continuity is what allows output to compound. Each action connects to the next without interruption. There is no reset, no restart, no re-entry cost. Just flow from one execution cycle into another. This is how high-discipline systems operate. Not through intensity, not through motivation, but through the absence of delay. And once this structure is restored, discipline no longer needs to be protected. Because there is nothing left that can interrupt it at the point where it matters most, the final resistance is not hesitation. It is relapse into controlled hesitation, the belief that you can allow small delays without consequence. At this stage, execution is mostly restored. You act more often than before. The gap has narrowed. But it has not been eliminated. And that remaining gap becomes the new point of failure. Because now, hesitation is selective. You act immediately on easy tasks. You delay on difficult ones. This creates a hidden divide in behavior. On the surface, discipline appears intact. But under pressure, the old pattern reactivates. Thinking returns precisely where it matters most. Before high-friction actions. This is where most systems collapse again. The mind justifies it differently this time. It no longer sounds like avoidance. It sounds like precision. This one needs more thought. I should approach this carefully. I don't want to make a mistake. But the structure is identical. Action is being delayed. And delay, regardless of reason, weakens the system. Because discipline does not operate differently based on task difficulty. It applies the same rule across all conditions. The moment you allow exceptions, you reintroduce variability. And variability breaks identity. Now you are no longer someone who acts immediately. You are someone who acts immediately, except when it matters more. That exception expands. Slowly, more tasks begin to qualify as important enough to think about. More moments get filtered. More delays reappear. And without noticing, the system returns to its original state. Controlled hesitation becomes full hesitation. This is why the final correction is absolute. There are no exceptions. Not for complexity. Not for importance. Not for uncertainty. The sequence remains fixed. See the task move. Even in high-stakes situations, the initial movement must occur without delay. Not reckless action, but immediate engagement. You begin. You enter the task. You establish motion. Then thinking can refine inside the process. But it never decides when to begin. This preserves structural integrity under pressure. Because pressure is where identity is tested. Anyone can act immediately when the task is simple. Discipline is revealed when the task is uncomfortable, unclear, or heavy. If hesitation appears there, the system is still unstable. So the rule must hold strongest at the point of greatest resistance. When you feel the urge to think first, that is the exact signal to move. Not later. Not after clarity. Immediately. This inverts the old pattern completely. The presence of resistance no longer delays action. It triggers it. This is where discipline becomes unbreakable. Because there is no condition left that can interrupt execution. Every possible entry point for delay has been removed. Thinking has no authority over initiation. Resistance has no control over timing. Only action remains. From this point, identity locks in. You are not someone who manages discipline. You are not someone who practices discipline. You are someone who executes without delay. This is not a trait. It is a structure. And once that structure is consistent across all conditions, it no longer requires effort to maintain. It sustains itself through repetition. There is no longer a question of will I act. There is only the continuation of action, moment after moment, without interruption. That is where discipline stops being fragile and becomes permanent. The last layer is where discipline no longer feels like something you are building, but something that can quietly decay if left unguarded. At this point, execution is fast. The gap is nearly gone. You respond to most signals without delay. But what remains is exposure to drift. Drift does not look like failure. It looks like slight softness in timing. You still act, but not instantly. You still execute, but not at the first signal. A fraction of delay returns. Barely noticeable. Easy to justify. And because nothing immediately breaks, it is accepted. This is how discipline erodes at an advanced level. Not through collapse, but through tolerance. Tolerance of small delays. Tolerance of minor hesitation. Tolerance of just this once. Each tolerated delay reintroduces instability into the system. Not enough to stop execution, but enough to weaken its precision. And discipline depends on precision. The difference between immediate action and slightly delayed action is not visible in a single instance. But across repetition, it compounds. The system begins to lose sharpness. Response time increases. Friction reappears. Initiation becomes slightly heavier. And most importantly, the certainty of execution begins to blur. You no longer move with absolute consistency. You move with high probability. That shift is critical. Because discipline is not built on probability. It is built on certainty. The moment certainty drops, identity begins to loosen. You are no longer operating as someone who executes without delay. You are operating as someone who usually executes. Usually is unstable. It allows exceptions. And exceptions expand. This stage requires a different form of awareness. Not effort. Not intensity. Precision. You must begin to detect delay at the smallest level. Not when you fail to act, but when you act slightly later than you should. That is the new threshold. The correction is immediate compression. The moment a gap is detected, even a fraction, you reduce it. Instantly. No analysis. No adjustment phase. You restore the sequence. Signal action. Nothing in between. This keeps the system sharp. Because discipline at this level is no longer about overcoming resistance. It is about maintaining structural integrity. Resistance will still exist, but it is no longer the threat. Drift is. Drift slowly reshapes behavior without triggering awareness. It disguises itself as normal variation. But discipline does not operate on variation. It operates on consistency. So consistency must be protected at the smallest unit of time. The moment of initiation. If that moment remains clean, free of delay, the entire system holds. If that moment becomes flexible, everything downstream begins to shift. Execution becomes less predictable. Momentum weakens. Continuity breaks. And once continuity breaks, rebuilding requires returning to the beginning again. Immediate action. Always. Not most of the time. Not when it is convenient. Every time. This is the final standard. Not because perfection is required, but because any allowance for delay introduces a variable that will expand under repetition. So the system closes completely. There is no space left for hesitation. No tolerance for delay. No negotiation at the point of action. Only execution. From this point forward, discipline is no longer something that can be improved. It can only be maintained. And maintenance is not active effort. It is the continuous refusal to let even the smallest delay exist between decision and action. That is what keeps the structure intact. That is what prevents regression. And that is what makes discipline permanent. The closing stage is where discipline no longer announces itself through effort, resistance, or intensity. It becomes silent. And because it becomes silent, it becomes easy to neglect. There is no longer a visible struggle. No internal conflict that signals danger. Execution happens. Tasks are completed. The system appears intact. But what disappears here is vigilance. Without vigilance, the structure begins to loosen, not through failure, but through unconscious allowance. You begin to move without strict adherence to sequence. The signal appears. And instead of immediate action, there is a micro delay. Not enough to stop execution. Just enough to introduce space. That space is the only thing discipline cannot tolerate. Because discipline is not defined by action alone. It is defined by the absence of delay before action. Once delay is allowed, even at a minimal level, the system shifts from automatic execution to conditional execution. You still act, but now there is a silent checkpoint reintroduced. A fraction of evaluation. A moment of softness. A nearly invisible pause. And because nothing collapses immediately, it feels harmless. This is where advanced systems fail. Not because they lack strength, but because they stop enforcing precision. Precision is what removed hesitation in the first place. And without it, hesitation returns in smaller, less noticeable forms. You begin to trust that it's fine. That you can afford a slight delay. That your system is strong enough to absorb it. But discipline does not degrade through large errors. It degrades through tolerated exceptions. Each exception reopens the door to variability. And variability spreads. The delay increases slightly. The response becomes less sharp. The certainty weakens. Not all at once. Gradually. Until one moment arrives where the action does not happen immediately, and this time, it does not happen at all. That is how regression begins. Not from zero, but from small permissions that accumulated over time. So at this level, the requirement changes. You are no longer building discipline. You are no longer restoring it. You are guarding it. And guarding requires a different behavior than building. It requires rejection. Immediate rejection of any delay, regardless of size. The moment you detect even the smallest hesitation, you act. Not to complete the task, but to eliminate the gap. The priority is no longer outcome. It is maintaining the sequence. Signal action. Unbroken. This is enforced continuously. Not through intensity, but through exactness. There is no emotional engagement with the process. No motivation. No reinforcement. Only adherence to structure. Because structure is what holds identity in place. At this stage, identity is no longer forming, it is fixed. You are someone who acts immediately. And that identity must be protected from erosion. Not by doing more, but by allowing less. Less delay. Less tolerance. Less deviation. Until the system becomes closed. Nothing enters between decision and execution. No thought. No evaluation. No pause. Only movement. From here, discipline does not grow. It stabilizes. And stability is what removes the need for effort entirely. There is no longer a process to manage. There is only a state that continues, uninterrupted, because nothing is allowed to interfere with it. That is the final position. Where discipline is no longer something you practice. And no longer something you improve. It is something you no longer have the ability to break, because the point at which it could be broken no longer exists. Execution, once stabilized, no longer needs expansion. It needs containment. The system is already built. The response is immediate. The gap has been removed. What remains is protection of that condition. At this level, failure does not come from inability. It comes from allowance. Allowance of delay. allowance of thought before movement, allowance of a single exception. But discipline cannot survive exceptions at the point where it was forged. The rule remains unchanged. Signal action. The outro is not a conclusion. It is a lock. No reflection is required. No reinforcement is needed. The system does not depend on understanding. It depends on preservation. You do not revisit the process. You do not question the structure. You do not adapt the sequence. You maintain it. Because the moment you step outside of it, even slightly, you reintroduce the exact condition that destroyed it before, the gap. And the gap is where discipline disappears. So nothing new is added. Nothing is optimized. Nothing is improved. Only one thing is enforced. Immediate execution, without exception, across all conditions. From this point forward, there is no progression. Only continuation. And continuation is what makes discipline permanent.